Blockchain Show is a podcast that demystifies cryptocurrencies and distributed ledger technology.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Blockchain Show. Today, we've got a special guest. We've got Monica Quaintance from Kadena, the head of research and networks. Monica, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ethan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us. We had Will on the show last year, and that was a really, really good episode, kind of talking about blockchain as a whole and what Kadena was doing. For those listening who may not have caught that whole episode, could you maybe just kind of bring us up to speed, maybe a little introduction into Kadena and tell us about yourself?
Sure. Kadena is what we like to call a hybrid blockchain platform. And what that means to us is that we are a public proof of work blockchain, our own proof of work blockchain built from scratch, not on top of any other platform, that also functions with other private blockchains, our own private blockchain, Kadena Kuro and Tendermint, and we're working on others as well. And the idea is that you could create a single application that uses our smart contract language that has elements that are both on the public blockchain and a private blockchain and could conceivably connect to other networks as well. So we like to consider ourselves a one-stop shop or platform for application development. We have a wallet that also functions as a developer IDE. Our goal is to be a super simple, really easy place where if you want to create an application that uses blockchain, come here and whatever you need, whether it's public blockchain that scales, that's fast, or private blockchain for safety, or both, you can do it all in one place on Kadena.
And how long have you been with Kadena? Has it been a while?
It feels like a lifetime. It's been a little more than 2 years.
Right on.
It was Will and Stu and then me. So it's been a wild ride going from just the three of us in a tiny co-working space to a team of more than 20 now. It's been amazing. I've learned a lot and grown a lot.
Yeah, it's a really interesting background. I mean, we've talked about some of the banks and how first they said there's no future in blockchain, but yet they would secretly develop their own blockchain. And I think that Stu and Will had something to do with JP Morgan. And when I bring that up to some people, they think, "Oh wow, that's something," and some other times they're like, "Oh wow, that's something, all right." But
yeah, our whole thesis is that if you ever wanted to actually do something real with blockchain that isn't just a toy application, the kind of thing where, if you wanted to create an app for finding an apartment rental where you wanted to do a background check and you wanted to hold money in escrow, like that would require the kind of infrastructure that real companies need, like to be able to test things. And if you mess it up, to be able to go in and change your smart contract code. That being able to have that kind of iterative development process is super important. And blockchain is in its infancy, has a lot of these issues, like you're not really sure if you commit this code, is it doing the thing that you want it to do? And if you mess it up, are you going to lose a lot of money doing it? So we're trying to put a lot of those safeguards in Kadena with our smart contract language Pact. We think people are going to like it from a development perspective.
Yeah, and we've covered different startups. We've even had some of them on the show that never really worked out. A couple years ago, blockchain seemed like this panacea that was going to solve everything. But then when it really came down to it, very few companies are able to make it work, like you said, very well said there. And this brings up the issue of scalability, which we used to hear a lot about. I've heard of hybrid blockchains before, but I'm just curious how you guys are going about it, because I know that you started from the ground up, which is kind of refreshing, to be honest. And how is this going to solve the issue of scaling?
Yeah, so from a public blockchain perspective, Kadena uses a new protocol design called Chainweb. And we've put a lot of time and energy and effort into developing Chainweb in a way that we think is going to allow people to have access to a scalable network in ways that nobody else has really conceived. The premise behind Chainweb is proof of work works. The only problem with proof of work is it doesn't let you do significant transaction volume, because in Bitcoin, for example, all the miners are all competing to make one block at a time. Instead, if you could have multiple chains all at the same time, all like Bitcoin, all having their own ledger, you could essentially have, if we have 10 chains right now, you could have 10x as many transactions going through at any time. But then you say, all right, you've just divided your hash power by 10 chains. Doesn't that make them weaker and less stable? If you only have 1/10 of the hash power on any chain, doesn't that make it more vulnerable? So Chainweb has this unique structure where each of these chains contains some information from its neighbor, from its peer chains. And right now, with 10 chains, each chain has 3 peers. And so you can't ever allow the network to diverge in that way. And even if you take over, for example, divert all of your hash power to one chain, then people may not accept your blocks because they don't contain the right information from the peer chains. It forces the network to play with each other and to stay in sync. It actually does work. We've been up since October, and people, we have miners from all over the world. In our very first week, we actually had a problem with the way that the Kadena nodes were configured, and all the Kadena nodes shut down, but all of the community nodes stayed up. So the company, we actually turned all of our nodes off and rebooted them, turned them back on, and the network was still going, and we just jumped right back on. So it really does work, and it really is decentralized. We're not running it anymore and haven't been for months.
Wow, that's awesome. And I saw a video showing some of the proof of work scaling. I'll include that in the show notes. And I mean, it's impressive because I was reading Bitcoin can process 7 transactions a second, Ethereum 15, and Kadena 750. So that's a huge leap forward.
Right now we're mining a new block about every 3 seconds.
Wow. Something else I liked was the environmental impact, because a lot of people are becoming aware that to mine Bitcoin, it's incredibly energy intensive. Something like, what was it, 66, almost 67 terawatt hours a year, or enough to power 10 million homes, which when you put it in that context, it does not seem sustainable. Is that just like a function of how Kadena is set up, that it just doesn't use as much energy? That's something that I didn't quite understand, how it could save like 1/50th of that power.
Yeah, so when we consider how much power it takes to generate a transaction on Kadena, saying that, if right now you get one Bitcoin transaction for all of the power that everybody is devoting to that transaction at any point in time, and even if only one miner gets the block, but everybody else spent all that power trying to compete for it. Because of the way that hash power is spread over the Kadena network, you get many more successes for the same amount of hash power. And as our network size grows, we're going to get more and more successes for the same amount of hash power. And that's really how we allow for the same amount of hash power, but much more benefit. And I quibble with some of these, we're wasting so much electricity issues in the first place, because when you think about most of that electricity is excess electricity anyway, because miners gravitate towards what's the cheapest. And the cheapest electricity is usually excess hydropower that wasn't getting used anyway. And when you think about what are the costs to us now of the traditional financial system, how many servers are we running all across the world in order to run ACH and to have banks duplicating all of these different financial systems? That's its own hidden cost. And I think if we can really make blockchain into something that's viable and usable, having transparency into how much it costs us to run this network versus all these other shadow networks is a really important consideration for whether blockchain is valuable or not.
That's a really good point. Don't even think about the status quo systems that countless billions of dollars have probably cost over the years. So that's definitely something to consider there. Yeah, so it's been about, I think, 3.5 years from Kadena's start till now, and I know you've been with them for most of that time. What's some of the takeaways that you've learned in working with a successful blockchain startup? Because, like I said, we've talked with more than I care to admit that didn't really quite make it.
I think for us, what has been the most important is to have a vision and stick to it. Do not get distracted by whatever the latest blockchain fad is, because there's going to be one every 60 days, a new thing that everybody is into, whether it's ZK snarks or whether it's pick blockchain flavor of the moment. Everybody's always going to be like, oh, well, what are you doing about XYZ? Or haven't you heard that such and such company is doing this thing? And we've always just been focused on the one thing that we've decided to do, which is we are going to create an awesome smart contract language. We are going to create a scalable blockchain that can support that smart contract language. We are going to give people a blockchain experience that can actually do the things that they need to do on a blockchain and not get distracted by all these other things. And that's been really key for us, really important. And I think that's the reason why I think we're the fastest time from build a team to actually ship. We raised money in April of 2018, and end of 2019, we hit our first ship date. We're doing a 3-phase launch. The first phase was in October. The second phase was in December. Our next phase happens on Wednesday. And we've always said these are our deadlines, and we've nailed them. We've nailed every single production deadline that we've said that we were going to make. And I think when it comes down to comparing us to all of these other projects that raised a bunch of money that didn't stay focused, that have let themselves get all over the map, we've never pushed a ship date. We're not a Telegram and we're not a Definity. Like, we've said we were going to launch the thing, and we launched the thing.
Yeah, that's so great. I really admire what you guys are doing. And tell us about the launch from your point of view. Tell me what you're excited about. And for the people listening, maybe give us a little bit of information about how they can get involved.
So the 3 phases of our launch, phase 1 in October was we actually launched the blockchain itself, the consensus mechanism, generating blocks. People on the peer-to-peer network sharing information with each other, message queues, memory pools, etc. That was really our test that Chainweb as a consensus mechanism worked. That was when we figured out that we were actually decentralized, because we had a packet problem, and then the Kadena nodes went down, but everybody else's nodes stayed up. Then we turned on transactions in December. Turning on transactions meant that people could actually start to execute and put transactions into blocks. So we weren't just mining empty blocks anymore. Blocks actually had transactions that could move Kadena tokens from account to account. And January 15, the goal is to turn on smart contracts, which means that users will be able to execute arbitrary code, anything they want to write on the blockchain. Right now, the only things that you can execute is code that Kadena wrote and pushed as part of the Genesis block, which is, transfer, create account, rotate key set to change ownership of accounts, all these, like your basic transactions. But starting today, you will be able to execute whatever code you want, which is really the final step to creating a network where people can create any kind of application they want. Sky's the limit.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about Pacts on the last episode, the kind of geared more towards human readability, simple and powerful. But you mentioned, did you say that users can create their own code, or is there like a separate kind of ecosystem besides Pact?
People can write their own Pact contracts. The Chainweb is designed to work with Pact, and our whole hypothesis behind smart contracts is people should be doing on a blockchain the kinds of transactions that are reasonable to do on a blockchain, which sounds like a tautological statement, but I'll unpack that. You should be doing on a blockchain committing small amounts of data, moving tokens around, tokenizing whatever you want, and moving that around. What you should not be doing on a blockchain is executing any kind of code that would be better suited to running on a server or on a computer. Anything that requires recursion or iterating in order to find the correct value. Because when you're thinking about it, you're spending gas that's executed on a world computer, and that's just wildly inefficient to do any kind of like Dijkstra's algorithm to find the shortest path between LA and New York. If you want to do that, make an oracle, call out to a server, get the value, and then put the value on the blockchain. So Pact has a very limited instruction set in terms of things that we let people do on a blockchain. But all of the things that we don't let you do are things that you shouldn't be doing on a blockchain anyway. We say that Pact is non-Turing complete on purpose, and that's actually part of what makes it super strong. And because Pact isn't Turing complete, we get to do this awesome full formal verification of the entire Pact smart contract language, which means that I've been running a lot of Pact transactions in the last week. And it's awesome because I've been typing them into Chainweaver, our wallet. And then even before I click go and submit the transaction, I can tell whether it's going to work or not, because the formal verification system actually checks the whole code of the smart contract and tells me what's going on before I even run it. So you never have this like, oh, I ran the thing and then I ran out of gas, or, oh, I ran the thing and then it didn't do what I wanted to do and I screwed it up and now I have to make a new account and start all over again. Like, none of those things happen in Pact. It's super cool.
Wow. That is awesome. I really enjoy listening to you talk about this. I'm glad that we got you on.
Thanks. I just talked about formal verification, but let me explain to you in a concrete way why that's particularly cool. So, formal verification is when other projects talk about, oh, we're implementing formal verification, what they usually mean is either A, they're formally verifying their compiler, which means that they're sure that whenever you take your code and then you run it through their compiler, that the thing that you get out is the thing that you put into the compiler, which is nice, but not particularly useful for users. Or they're talking about formally verifying a subset of the language, which means if you use certain contracts that they've checked and made sure work, then you know that your code is going to work. But what we've done at Kadena is we've actually created a language that is fully formally verified, which means that anything that you can conceive of writing in Pact is something that can check itself to make sure that it does what you think it will do. Which means that if you write code and you put in something like, make sure that my balance can't go negative, and then you write a transaction where you accidentally send too much money, it will tell you, this doesn't work. It violates this condition that you put into the code. So it's a way of adding some human intuition and understanding to how your code is going to execute before you execute it.
Thank you for expanding on that. I really enjoy how you're connecting public and private blockchains without kind of singling out any particular users or sharing confidential information. I think that's an important part of blockchain. It's pseudo-anonymous to begin with. I think some people still have a romantic vision, like Satoshi's vision of the blockchain, which if you look at Bitcoin nowadays, it's just really, it didn't quite pan out like that white paper. It just didn't quite work like they thought it would. I don't know how else to say that. There's still a lot of hardliners that think Bitcoin is the only way to go about it, but because a big part of it is taking out the middleman. But in order to be completely decentralized, you have to really know what you're doing. And a lot of people just, they don't. So they have to find, for lack of a better term, a middleman. How do you deal with criticism that you guys are, in a sense, a type of middleman?
That's an interesting question. I think I want to unpack that into two responses. One is that people say that they want decentralized, but I'm not always convinced that they know what they want. Specifically, imagine that you're writing a dApp, and then you want your code to execute on a blockchain. But then at some point, you're going to have a server that does front-end rendering. Like, people are going to want to go to a web page in order to put in some information in order to make things happen. Your server is still going to have to be hosted somewhere. You're still going to need to render code in order to then execute transactions on a blockchain. So when people are talking about dApps, that's already a disingenuous concept in the first place. I do agree that being able to have data out there that's saved in a way that's censorship resistant, that isn't only running on the backbone of Amazon or Google, like, those things are powerful. And I think that that's one of the real strengths of blockchain. But I'm not convinced that people, when they say they want decentralized, even know what that means. So that's point one. Point two is Kadena is, like, sure, we're a middleman in that you have to use software that was originally developed by Kadena. But at this point, the Kadena network isn't even run by us, and Pact is an open source language. So as far as middlemen go, we're pretty unmotivated by controlling software or controlling the direction of where this is going to go in the future. So compared to the middleman of Google or Facebook, I think we are more trustworthy because we are actually less requiring of your trust.
That's really well said. I agree with you on both fronts there. Now, since we last spoke, I think it was in April with Kadena, you guys have been recognized by Forrester as one of the most promising blockchain companies to watch in 2020. So congratulations.
Thanks.
I'm not sure when this happened, but you had existing partnerships with, billion-dollar companies, Polkadot, Cosmos, just to name a few, Amazon. Just kind of going forward, it's interesting to me to see they're probably trying to gauge where this technology is going. I imagine they have their own projects, but do you see other, like, data management, healthcare, insurance companies, any energy? What are some of the other prospective industries that you think might get involved?
Yeah, it's interesting. Earlier in last year, we made what I like to call the 3-year plan, which is, who do we think is going to be the target user of blockchain starting now and then moving into the next 3 years? And we tried to identify industries and particular types of companies that we thought would be the first movers, and then the second wave, and then the third wave. And I think we've decided that fintech is really a significant place of growth because they are looking to be disruptive in a way that has potentially extremely lucrative. And but they're not afraid of new technology, because some of these, banks, Will and Stu left JP Morgan for a reason, because they saw the potential of this new technology, but knew that there was no way that anybody was actually going to be able to move within the bank in the kind of time frame that actually allows people to get a first move on the market. So fintech companies, we're really seeing potential there. And I don't think I can talk about the companies that we're working with right now, but there's movement there. And then consumer insurance has more potential than large scale insurance. I think large scale insurance is probably going to take us another couple of years. And more consumer driven and facing applications, I think, are going to happen first because those tend to be more iterative. But I hope that there is long-term potential in terms of getting significant financial technology to shift over to using not only private blockchain, but this kind of integration with public blockchain networks. I think that we're going to see real movement.
And I imagine that, once everything is live officially, it's going to be, again, I'm not trying to jinx anything here, but congestion is something that I'm trying to understand how you guys are going to deal with the quote unquote crypto kitties problem, because I know we've talked about that before on this show. I mean, it makes sense to me that with all these different chains running, you could just kind of silo different virtual applications to certain chains while the rest of the network kind of runs unencumbered. Is that kind of how it works?
So I like to think about Chainweb visually as more of a load balancer because of the way the network is tied together from a consensus perspective. One chain can't ever get too far ahead of the others. So when we talk about load balancing, if you deploy your CryptoKitties app to chain 0 and then it becomes wildly popular and chain 0 starts to slow down, then you can deploy your application to additional chains in order to spread out the load of your application. And the network itself is designed to be forked to larger configurations over time. So if 10 chains is not enough, we can make the network bigger, and it's actually designed to grow that way, to start at a reasonable size. And then as demand increases, if the network becomes significantly congested, being able to fork out so that more blocks are generated at any given time. That's the goal. We're not there now because it does require more bandwidth. You have to be able to replicate more nodes all at the same time. But that's the progress of the network is start at 10 chains and then get bigger and bigger over time.
We've talked about the sharing economy before. Do you think that this is going to usher in a new age, or maybe just bring in officially the sharing economy among businesses we haven't seen before?
I definitely see us growing into that place where, because smart contracts are no longer dangerous, smart contracts are safe and easy, then companies can put up smart contracts and then call each other and no longer have to worry about, if a parity wallet type, if they change their core contract or if they mess with what's going on, is it going to crash my app? Because of the way Pact imports work, you actually import a whole copy of their contract and freeze it at a particular version. So I could call one of your contracts and integrate it into my workflow and not have to worry about it from a safety perspective. So to go back to the apartment hunting example, if you have a smart contract that does background checking and I have a smart contract that does escrow, I could string those together into a single workflow that does a background check, and then you put money in escrow, and that way you've verified somebody that you want them to be a roommate, and then you get their money, but you both know that, no, I'm not going to walk off with your security deposit. It's a simple example, but it demonstrates this idea that you can string together multiple smart contracts in a safe way. And once you start thinking about that, you can start thinking about blockchains like API calls that actually move not just data, but actual value.
Fascinating. Yeah. I encourage anyone who's listening to get involved with Kadena to learn more. I know you guys have some educational videos, but where can people go to learn more about the launch and maybe just kind of educate themselves if they'd like to learn more?
Well, we have all of the people on our Discord channel all of the time. So you can go to our website, which is Kadena.io, and there you can go to all the places. It links to our GitHub, it links to our Discord, and that's probably the best place to get started is to go to Pact and read the docs. And you can jump over to all of those resources directly from our website.
Great. Well, it's really, really good talking with you. I always enjoy, well, I guess this is only the second one, but each time I talk with Kadena, I have a more kind of focused and realistic vision of the blockchain space, where we're at, where we're going, what you're working on. How do you think that this is going to change people's lives that they may not be aware of? Because education's a big part of this show, and there's still people tuning in that don't even know about blockchain. So how is Kadena going to change people's perception of blockchain?
That's a heavy question. I like it. When I'm staring up at the ceiling late at night and thinking about, like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? I come back to this idea of what do you do with your own data? And do you have agency over it? And where are we going as a society? This is sort of an abstract question, but I don't want to end up in a totally dystopian Black Mirror world where I'm constantly selling my information to XYZ giant corporation, and I don't feel like I have any control over my own life. And this may sound like a techno-utopian anarchist response, but blockchain really does give people a truly viable alternative to the monolith corporation that owns our data. And I think people are starting to wake up to the idea of, maybe I don't want Facebook and Google and Amazon to own my life. Maybe I want another way. And that's the future alternative, that hopefully what we're making with Kadena and with blockchain is the potential to create an alternate future in which we have a choice.
That is awesome. That is such a good response. You answered the question that I was trying to pose so beautifully and eloquently. And thank you so much for joining us, Monica. It's been a real pleasure and an honor to speak with Kadena for a second time. I wish you guys all the best with your launch. I guess with that, I encourage everybody to go to kadena.io to learn more. Yeah, thank you, Monica.
Sweet. Thanks, Ethan.